I always believed my father protected our family. He said it often, said it like a promise, said it like a rule. But control only works when the other person agrees to it. And the night my mother stopped agreeing was the night our family began to change. My father used to say he protected my mother in front of everyone, with pride, like it was proof of love. He said it often, said it like a vow. And for years, we believed him. We believed the joint account meant unity. We believed the rules meant safety. We believed his voice meant strength. What we did not understand was that protection is not the same thing as control. And sometimes the person who says, "I provide for this family," is not the one keeping it alive. To understand the truth about my father, you first have to understand how convincing the lie was, because it took us 30 years to realize something. The man who claimed he was protecting our family was actually the one my mother had been quietly protecting us from. My father always told the story the same way. He would straighten his shoulders first, like he was putting on a uniform, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor as the sharp scent of his cologne reached the room before his words did. Then he would look at whoever was listening and say, with quiet pride, "I love my wife. I have always protected her. From my family, from anybody." He said it like the words themselves made it true, as if the words themselves proved it. And when I was young, I believed him. We all did, because he did not just say it at home. He said it in front of other people, church friends, neighbors, relatives who already had their own opinions about my mother and did not bother hiding them. He made his love loud. He made his protection visible. If somebody criticized my mother's cooking, he would cough and change the subject. If an aunt asked why she did not dress more like a proper wife, he would flash a tight smile and say, "My wife is fine. Do not worry about my house." And people would nod. Some would even admire him. They would say he was different, strong, a man who did not let anyone interfere with his marriage. Sometimes I would see my mother's face soften when he said those things, just slightly, like her shoulders unclenched for a moment. Sometimes she would glance at him like she was grateful. And when you are a child, you collect moments like that and build a whole truth out of them. I used to think my father was the wall between my mother and the world. It took me years to understand something else about walls. They do not only keep danger out, sometimes they keep people in, and most times the people trapped inside them are the very ones the wall claims to protect. The first time I noticed the wall working in both directions, I was too young to name it. We were getting ready for a family gathering, the kind where the women arrived early and disappeared into the kitchen, while the men sat in the living room, with their legs crossed, speaking loudly about politics and money and how hard life was. My mother stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom. She had chosen a dress the color of fresh cream, simple and modest, the kind that moved softly when she turned. She looked beautiful, not flashy, not begging for attention, just herself. My father stood behind her with his arms folded, watching her like he was examining a purchase. "That is not the one." My mother paused with her earrings halfway in. "It's fine," she said softly. "It covers everything." "It is not the one," he repeated. His voice had a calmness that made it feel final. No shouting, no insult, just an instruction, as if he was telling her where to put a chair. My mother removed the earrings slowly and set them on the dresser. Then she opened the closet and pulled out another dress, darker, less soft, less her. The type of dress that looked like it had been chosen for someone who wanted to disappear politely. My father's face relaxed. "That is the one," he said, satisfied. I remember staring at the cream dress still hanging on the closet door, untouched, like a thought she wasn't allowed to finish. I didn't understand why a dress mattered. But I understood something else. Whatever my mother wanted did not have weight in that room. My father's preferences did. And my mother moved like she was trying not to disturb them. At gatherings, my father became the version of himself that people praised. He would place a hand on my mother's back when we entered, guiding her forward like a protective gesture. People would see that and whisper, "You're blessed. Your husband really cares." My mother would smile, a small smile, the kind that lived only at the edges of her mouth. My father would speak for her before she could answer questions. He would laugh loudly at jokes she did not make. He would correct little details of what she said, not rudely, just quickly, as if the truth was a thing he carried and she sometimes misplaced. If my mother stood with the women too long, my father would call her name from across the room. Not harshly, not angrily, just enough to remind he was aware of where she was. She would look up immediately, always immediately, like her body was trained to respond before her mind finished thinking. Sometimes an aunt would say, "He's always watching you," and laugh as if it was romance. My mother would laugh too, a few seconds late, and I would stand there holding a cup in both hands, watching all the adults smile at something that made my stomach feel tight without knowing why. At home, my father's love did not look loud. It looked organized. It looked like lists and routines, like rules that were never written, but somehow always enforced. My father liked order the way some people liked music. He needed it around him, steady and predictable, like a heartbeat. When life felt out of control, he tightened the rules. When he was pleased, the rules loosened slightly, but they never disappeared. He had opinions about everything: how the living room should be arranged, how the curtains should hang, what food should be cooked on what day, what time the children should sleep, what time we should wake up, how loudly we were allowed to laugh in our own home. He also had opinions about my mother. He liked her hair a certain way. When she tried a new style once, he stared at it in silence long enough that she went back into the bathroom and changed it. He liked her nails simple. He did not like bright colors. If she brought a shade he considered too loud, he would sigh like she had disappointed him on purpose. He liked her clothes modest, but not old-looking. He didn't want her to draw attention, but he also didn't want anyone to think he could not maintain his wife. He used words like maintain, as if my mother was part of the house. I didn't understand then how dangerous that language was. I only knew it made her sound like property. I remember one day my mother had bought underwear that made her feel comfortable. Nothing inappropriate, just comfortable. Soft fabric, not tight. Something that let her breathe. My father saw it in the laundry basket. He held it up between two fingers like it was evidence of a crime. "What is this?" he asked. My mother stopped moving. "It's just underwear," she said. He frowned. "This is not what you wear." My mother's cheeks flushed. "It's comfortable." My father's voice did not rise, but something sharpened in it. "I don't care about comfortable. I care about what is proper." My mother stared at the floor. Then she nodded once. Later, those underwear disappeared. She never wore them again. That's when I realized my father's control did not stop at what people saw. It reached all the way down to her skin. When I describe my father, people often expect me to say he was violent. He was not violent in the way people imagine. He was violent in the way he took up space. All of it. His moods were the weather in our house. If he was calm, we breathed. If he was irritated, we moved quietly. We became careful. We turned into versions of ourselves that were smaller, smoother, less likely to cause friction. He did not have to hit anyone. His voice could rearrange a room. A single "What did you say?" could erase laughter instantly. A sigh could make my mother start apologizing for things she hadn't done yet. I learned early that peace in our house was not a natural state. It was something we had to earn. My father's proudest proof of love was always the same. Everything is shared in this house, he would say. He said it with dignity, like he was describing a sacred principle. We are one body, one family, one account. When I was a child, I thought that sounded beautiful. A joint account, the symbol of togetherness. He talked about it like it was romance. He would tell my mother, "Put it in the account. We will manage it together." He would tell other people, "My wife has access to everything. She does not need to ask me for money. She can take what she wants." They would nod approvingly. Some women would look at my mother with envy. My mother would smile politely. What people did not see was what happened after. They did not see the way my father sat at the table at night with his phone in his hand, scrolling through transactions. They did not see my mother's face when she walked past him, trying to appear casual, as if she was not aware that her every purchase had become a line item in his quiet audit. They did not hear the questions. Why did you withdraw this? What is this charge? Why did you need this much for groceries? And it was always groceries. Always. The same amount of money, give or take, the same list of necessities. Food, soap, cleaning supplies. Basic things that kept a household alive. But my father asked as if my mother had robbed him. Sometimes she would answer in detail. Sometimes she would show receipts. Sometimes she would open cabinets to prove that the rice was there, the oil was there, the detergent was there, like she had to justify feeding her own children. My father would listen, expression blank, then nod once as if the case was closed, and life would continue until the next withdrawal. My mother did not complain to people, not because she did not feel it, but because complaining required energy she never seemed to have. My mother was always working. When she came home from her job, she did not come home to rest. She came home to another job, cooking, washing, homework, laundry, caring for 4 children, managing the silent emotional labor of keeping everyone calm. At night, when the house was finally quiet, I would sometimes wake up and see a light under the living room door. I would walk softly and find my mother at the table with her laptop open. Her eyes would look tired and shiny, like she had been staring too long. "What are you doing?" I would whisper. She would close the laptop a little like she was hiding it. "Just something small," she would say. "What small thing?" She would smile faintly. "Just work." I did not understand then that small meant she was doing online gigs, tiny jobs that paid tiny amounts, work that added up slowly like water dripping into a bucket. Work she did quietly, because she could not rely on the joint account without being questioned. She never called it survival, but that is what it was. When I was little, I thought my father bought everything, because that is how he spoke. He spoke like our lives were built by his hands alone. My children have what they need because of me. My wife lives well because of me. This family stands because of me. And my father had a way of saying things that made you feel silly to doubt him. So I did not doubt him. Not until I started noticing the pattern of who paid when we were outside. If we went to a school event and there was a fee, my mother pulled out her card. If a child needed new shoes, my mother did the measuring. My mother did the purchasing. If the lights were about to be cut off, my mother made calls quietly, her voice soft and urgent, like she was trying not to wake the monster of embarrassment. My father would walk past, annoyed. "You worry too much," he would tell her. He would say it like her panic was a personality flaw, not a response to real consequences. And my mother would swallow her fear and keep moving. Sometimes my father would offer protection in a way that looked noble, and it would confuse me all over again. A relative would insult my mother, and my father would step in quickly. He would say, "Do not speak to my wife that way." He would sound firm. He would sound like a man who loved his wife. And my mother would stand quietly beside him, eyes lowered, hands clasped, like she was waiting for the storm to pass. Afterwards, people would praise him. "He really stands up for you," they would say. My mother would nod. But on the drive home, my father would be irritated. "You embarrassed me today," he would say. My mother would blink. "How?" "You looked sad," he would snap. "Do not look sad when my family is talking. They will think I don't take good care of you." My mother would stare out the window and whisper, "Okay." That was the thing about my father's protection. It was real, but it had conditions. He defended her from other people, but he required her to perform strength in the way that made him look good. He wanted her safe, but he wanted her safe inside the version he alone approved. By the time I was a teenager, I had begun noticing things I could not unsee. I noticed that my father always had something new. A new watch, a new phone, shoes that looked expensive, little upgrades that appeared quietly, like they were natural. I also noticed that my mother never had anything new unless she bought it herself. And even then, she bought carefully. She chose things that could be justified, nothing that looked like joy, nothing that looked like indulgence. If she bought a new blouse, it was because her old one had faded. If she bought new shoes, it was because the old ones were cracking. Everything had a reason. My father did not need reasons. One evening, I came into the kitchen and found my mother holding a small slip of paper, a receipt. Her eyebrows were pulled together like she was doing math inside her head. My father stood across from her with his arms crossed. His voice was low but sharp. "How can groceries cost this much?" he asked. My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the receipt. "It's for the week," she said. "Rice, beans, chicken." "We don't need chicken," my father cut in. My mother's lips parted, then closed. There was a long silence. Then she said very quietly, "But children need protein." The air changed. My father's eyes narrowed. "Do not teach me what children need." My mother immediately lowered her voice even more. "I am not teaching you. I am just— You are being disrespectful," he said. My mother swallowed, nodded, and said, "I am sorry." I stood in the doorway with my backpack still on, watching the way she bent over a grocery receipt like it was a confession. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that my father did not just want obedience. He wanted gratitude for obedience. He wanted her to apologize for needing things. He wanted to feel powerful, even over food. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I heard soft movement in the hallway. I got up and saw my mother in the living room, her laptop open again, the screen casting light on her face. She looked older than she should have looked, not because of wrinkles, but because of the way her eyes carried weight. She didn't notice me first. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. I watched her for a moment, silent, then whispered, "Mom!" She startled and quickly minimized the screen. "What are you doing?" I asked again. She hesitated, then opened the screen just enough for me to see a page with numbers and a small payment confirmation. "Just something small," she said. "Why?" I asked. She took a breath and said, like she was speaking to herself, "So I don't have to beg." My throat tightened, because she had never begged, not once, not in the dramatic way people imagine. She cooked, she cleaned, she worked, she provided, she made the house run. But she still learned to live like she was asking permission to exist. I went back to bed, but I could not sleep. My father's words replayed in my head. "I protect my wife." I believed him. I repeated it. I defended him. But now I began to wonder what protection meant in his mouth. Did it mean keeping her safe? Or did it mean keeping her contained? Because those two things sound similar until you live inside them. And the more I looked, the more I saw it. My father did not like my mother to have anything that did not pass through him first. Not money, not choices, not even comfort. And the most frightening part was not that he did it. It was how normal it felt, how routine, how cleanly it fit into the story he told everyone about love. The next morning, my mother was up early, moving quietly through the kitchen. She packed lunches, she wiped counters, she boiled water. She prepared like the day was a battle she had to win before it started. My father came in, looked around, and nodded with approval. "You see," he said, almost proudly to no one in particular, "this is what a good home looks like. I built this." My mother did not correct him. She never corrected him. She simply kept moving. And I watched her from the doorway, holding my breath, and thought, if my mother is the one keeping this house alive, Then why does she look like she has to earn permission to be here? That was the first day I understood something I had not wanted to understand. The love my father bragged about was not soft. It was not freeing. It was not safe. It was a kind of love that demanded submission and called it devotion. And it was only the beginning. Because the older I got, the more I realized the truth. My father did not just manage our money, he managed the story of our family. And my mother, she was paying for a life where she was not allowed to choose herself, not even in small ways, not even in silence. Somewhere along the way, my father stopped feeling like Dad. He became Daniel. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just gradually, the way truth replaces illusion. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I stopped believing him. I used to think love was loud because my father made it loud. But love in our house had two versions. There was Daniel's version, structured, controlled, visible to outsiders. And then there was Lena's version, soft, repetitive, almost invisible unless you were paying attention. Daniel loved through ownership. Lena loved through repetition. Every morning before school, Lena stood at the door. Jonah, hug. I love you. Then another hug. Tighter, quieter. Always remember that. Then Ruth. Then Caleb. Then me. 2 hugs each. Every day. Sometimes more if Daniel was in a mood. One afternoon, when I was about 12, Caleb asked her, laughing, "Why do you always give 2 hugs?" Lena smiled. "That's just my style." But her eyes lingered on Daniel, who was sitting at the table scrolling through sports scores. And I think we all understood something we did not yet know how to say. The first hug was from her. We did not say it out loud. But the second hug was filling the space our father left empty. Daniel never hugged us, not once that I can remember. He did not say, "I love you." He didn't ask about our fears. He did not sit on the edge of our beds at night. He believed provision was love, but provision, in his mind, was theoretical, because the actual math told a different story. The joint account was Daniel's favorite symbol. He spoke about it like it was sacred. "We are one," he would say. "One income, one vision, one family." What he never mentioned was that Lena's salary was much larger than his. What he never mentioned was that her employment provided the medical insurance for all 6 of us. What he never mentioned was that without her employment, the structure he bragged about would collapse. But Daniel liked to manage. He liked dashboards, notifications, statements. Every evening after dinner, he sat at the head of the table with his phone in his hand like a judge reviewing cases. Ping, ping, ping. Transactions. He would scroll slowly. "Lena?" She would already be standing. "Yes." "What is this withdrawal?" "Groceries." "For what?" "Food." The word would hang there. Daniel would exhale sharply. "You must learn to plan better." Lena never raised her voice. "I will try." That phrase, "I will try," became the soundtrack of her adulthood. But while Lena justified grocery bills, Daniel never justified himself. A new watch on his wrist, golf shoes from the sporting goods store, a club membership he called networking, premium sports channels, dinner receipts from expensive restaurants, often alone, sometimes with colleagues, never with us. When we asked to go out as a family, he would say it was unnecessary. "We have food at home." And Lena would nod. "We have food at home." Then I noticed something else. When Daniel came home with a new watch, he held his wrist differently. When a package from a sporting goods store arrived, he opened it immediately, excitement flashing across his face like a teenager. But when Lena bought herself a pair of shoes after 3 years of wearing the same pair to work, she left the box in the corner for days before opening it, as if joy required approval. Daniel's indulgence was never framed as selfish. It was framed as earned. I work hard. I deserve this. I sacrifice for this family. The word sacrifice fascinated me as I grew older. I tried to locate it in our daily life, in the grocery lists Lena trimmed and the overtime she took without announcing it, in the way she patched old curtains instead of replacing them. But I never found it in him. Because I could not see what he was sacrificing. He did not cook. He did not manage schedules or attend parent meetings unless it was convenient. He did not buy our clothes or pay for extracurricular activities without questioning them. But he sacrificed. At least in his own story. Lena never competed with his narrative. She simply built a second system underneath it. After Daniel went to bed, she logged into her laptop. Small freelance tasks, online tutoring, editing, survey panels. Tiny payments that accumulated slowly. That money never entered the joint account. That money became our shoes, our birthday cakes, our emergency dentist visits, our school trip fees. I once overheard her whispering into the phone late at night. "Yes, I can submit it by morning." Her voice was hoarse with exhaustion. When she hung up, she pressed her fingers against her eyes like she was trying to push back sleep. "Mom," I said from the doorway. She startled and smiled. "Eli, son, you should be asleep. Why do you work so much?" She hesitated. Then she said something that never left me. "So that you and your siblings never have to ask permission to eat." I did not understand then how much of her life had been spent negotiating for things that should have been automatic. Disillusionment did not arrive all at once. It accumulated quietly, like dust on furniture you walk past every day. As I grew older, I began noticing patterns I had once ignored. Daniel never bought Lena anything. Not once that I can clearly remember. No flowers, no spontaneous gifts, no small surprises. But Lena bought for him constantly. New ties for work, polished shoes, shirts in colors he preferred, a watch one year when she had been saving in small increments. I remember that birthday. She wrapped the box carefully, blue paper, silver ribbon tied twice to keep it tight. Daniel opened it at the dining table while we watched. He lifted the watch, studied it. "It's nice," he said. "Nice." No embrace, no kiss, no thank you, just an assessment. Lena smiled as if that was enough. A few weeks later, her birthday came. We asked Daniel what he had planned. He frowned slightly as if the question itself were unnecessary and said, "She has everything she needs." That night, Lena cooked dinner, her own birthday dinner. Daniel talked at length about his workload, about sacrifice, about how much pressure he carried for the family. "I give you my name," he said at one point, looking around the table as if expecting applause. "I protect you." He leaned back in his chair. "I keep this family together." Lena nodded. I did not understand why those words felt like a transaction. Years later, I would. It took me a long time to realize something painfully simple. My mother was quietly underwriting the story my father told about himself. The illusion began to crack in small, undeniable ways. The first fracture came from Ruth. Lena was standing at the kitchen counter, phone in her hand. Daniel sat at the table reviewing the bank app like he always did in the evenings. "Why do you have to ask before buying food?" Ruth asked suddenly. Silence. Daniel did not look up immediately. "It's respect," he said, coldly. "But it's groceries. Necessities." Daniel's eyes lifted slowly. "You are too young to understand finances." The air thickened. Ruth lowered her head, but something had shifted. The question had been asked out loud. The hospital moment came later. I had a minor accident, nothing serious, but insurance paperwork was required. Daniel stepped forward confidently, puffed up his chest, and said, "My coverage handles it." The nurse asked for the primary holder. Daniel paused, opened his mouth, closed it, no words came out. Lena answered quietly, "It's under my employer." The nurse typed, "Primary holder, Lena Whitaker." Daniel was listed as dependent. I watched his jaw tighten. He said nothing, but I could not stop thinking about it afterward. The man who claimed he protected us medically was medically protected by her employment, Lena's employment. The final crack came when I needed financial documentation for a college application. Lena handed me a folder without hesitation. Inside were statements, tuition transfers, insurance payments, savings breakdowns, pension summaries. I saw numbers I had never been meant to compare. Daniel's salary, Lena's salary. Hers was larger, significantly. I flipped through years of records, emergency transfers drawn from the quiet reserve she built through years of side work, scholarship gaps filled quietly, deposits labeled simply tuition. Every scholarship had a gap. Every acceptance letter came with a number still due, and every one of those numbers, Lena covered. Not with the account Daniel monitored, with the quiet system she had been building for years while he believed he was the one holding the family together. She made sure none of us started adulthood carrying debt. "I want you to begin on solid ground," she once told me. I did not realize she had built that ground herself. I stared at those statements long after she left the room. If she was the provider, then what exactly was Daniel protecting her from? That was when I began seeing everything more clearly. Daniel's golf membership, the sporting goods purchases, the premium sports subscriptions, the expensive restaurant receipts. He never justified those. He called them earned. But Lena had to explain groceries, shoes, school notebooks, and eventually $80 for Caleb's art. At the time, it looked like a small number. It was not. The control that had once wrapped itself around her was now stretching toward us. Caleb was the one the one who turned blank papers into possibilities. Daniel called it distraction, Lena called it development, and Caleb felt the pressure first, not in a dramatic way, in the quiet way a child begins erasing parts of himself before anyone asks him to. His drawings became smaller. He stopped leaving sketchbooks on the table. He began asking, "Is this okay?" before starting something he used to do freely. And when Daniel tried to shrink Caleb the way he had shrunk Lena, that was when the story changed. The refrigerator hummed loudly in the silence, and somewhere a fork settled against porcelain, like something being set down for the last time. The first time Daniel's control became visible to all of us in a way that could not be denied, it happened quietly. Jonah had been accepted to a school competition that required a registration fee. He was proud. Lena was proud. Daniel read the form, expression tightening. "This is unnecessary." "It is important to him," Lena said carefully. "It costs too much." Lena glanced at Jonah, whose shoulders were already folding inward. "I will handle it," she said. Daniel's eyes snapped at her. "With what?" She did not answer. He understood immediately. "You are hiding money from me." The air went still. "I am not hiding. I am just managing." Daniel's voice rose slightly. "This house does not have two systems. Everything goes through me." That was the first time I saw Lena straighten her spine. She did not make a scene, only a slight lift, enough to signal that something inside her had shifted. "This is for our son." Daniel turned to Jonah. "You do not need this. Focus on real things." Jonah nodded quickly, fear flickering across his face, and something in Lena's eyes darkened. That was the day I realized Daniel's control was expanding. It was no longer just about Lena. It was about us. It started small. "What are you wearing?" he would ask Ruth. "That shirt is too bright." "Why do you need that club?" "Why are you always reading? Go do something productive." Every question sounded reasonable. Every restriction sounded practical. But I saw the pattern. He was not dieting. He was narrowing. The house began to feel tighter. Our laughter softened. Our opinions shortened. Lena noticed. Of course she noticed. She doubled the hugs, 3 sometimes. "I love you," she would whisper into our hair, "more than anything." One evening, after Daniel dismissed Caleb's interest in art as a waste of time, Caleb retreated to his room and closed the door softly. Not slammed, not violently, but firm enough to make a point. Lena followed. I stood in the hallway and heard her voice. "You are allowed to like what you like." A pause. Then she continued, "Do not shrink for anyone." That was not something she said often, and I knew she wasn't just speaking to Caleb. She was speaking to herself. The breaking moment did not come with shouting. It came with a sentence.
Daniel was reviewing the bank app again. He saw a payment, small but unfamiliar. What is this? Lena did not hesitate. Caleb's art supplies. Daniel's jaw tightened. You asked me? No. You think you can just do whatever you want now? Lena's voice remained steady. It was $32. That's not the point. He turned to Caleb, who was standing frozen near the counter. You are becoming entitled. Caleb's face drained of color. I didn't ask. Do not speak. That was when Lena moved. She stepped between Daniel and Caleb. It was subtle, just one step, but it changed the geometry of the room. He is a child, she said. Daniel blinked, surprised. So? So you don't speak to him like that? The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouting. Daniel's voice dropped low. You are challenging me? I'm protecting my son. The word protect hung in the air like a mirror. Daniel stared at her. For years, that word belonged to him. Now it had shifted. He laughed, but it did not sound amused. You think you can run this house? Lena's eyes did not leave his. I have been running it. That was the moment. Not the divorce papers, not the separation, not the quiet ending that came later. That was when the marriage finally cracked. Because Daniel had always tolerated Lena's silence. He had tolerated her exhaustion. He had tolerated her quiet side work, but he could not tolerate defiance, especially not in front of the children. That night the house did not feel tense. It felt different, like a door had opened somewhere no one expected. Lena came into my room before bed. She hugged me once, then twice. Her arms trembled slightly. Mom, I whispered. Yes? Are you okay? She smiled, but it was not the same smile as before. Yes, she said, and for the first time in my life, I believed her. Because this time, she wasn't shrinking. She was standing. My father believed he had built our family through control, but the truth was beginning to show. It was not control that kept us together. It was Lena, our mother. And the moment Daniel tried to control us the way he had controlled her, she stopped allowing it. And once that happened, the ending had already begun. There is a moment in every house where the air changes. It does not happen loudly. It happens when laughter starts sounding careful. That was how it began. Caleb had always been the one who watched more than he spoke, not fragile, not weak, just observant. While Jonah chased achievements and Ruth argued her opinions into existence, Caleb sat on the floor with a pencil and turned blank pages into entire worlds. He drew buildings that bent like they were breathing, faces that carried secrets, hands that looked like they were reaching for something just out of view. He did not show his drawings easily. You had to earn that. Lena earned his first. She would sit beside him on the floor, skirt folded under her knees, and watch without interrupting. That's beautiful, she would whisper. Caleb would shrug. It's nothing. But he would lean slightly closer to her. Daniel noticed. He always noticed the things that did not move through him first. The first comment came on a Sunday afternoon. Caleb was sketching at the dining table when Lena prepared dinner. Daniel walked in, golf shirt crisp, the smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air. He just returned from the club. He glanced at the paper. What is that? A design, Caleb said quietly. For what? I don't know yet. You don't know yet? Daniel chuckled, not warmly. Caleb lowered his eyes. Daniel picked up the sketchbook and flipped through it, page after page of careful lines. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel said it. You waste too much time on this. The sentence landed heavier than shouting would have. Lena turned from the stove. He likes it, she said gently. Daniel did not look at her. Liking something does not make it useful. He placed the sketchbook back down, not slammed, not violently, but firm enough to make a point. Caleb nodded, as if he agreed, and went back to drawing, but his strokes were lighter after that. For years, Daniel's control had centered on Lena. Now it was beginning to reach the rest of us. He began asking Caleb questions that sounded reasonable but felt surgical. How much did those pencils cost? Why do you need better paper? What exactly is your plan with this? Caleb did not have a plan. He had curiosity. That was enough for Lena. It was not enough for Daniel.
One evening, Caleb mentioned an art workshop his teacher recommended. It was not expensive, But it required registration. And more importantly, it required Daniel's approval. Lena listened carefully. "That sounds wonderful," she said. Daniel did not look up from his phone. "How much?" Caleb hesitated. $80. Daniel let out a sharp exhale. "For drawing?" "It is more than drawing," Caleb said, quietly. Daniel's head lifted slowly. "Do not correct me." Silence. Ruth stared at her plate. Jonah froze mid-bite. I felt the air thin. Lena placed her fork down, gently. "It could be good for him," she said. Daniel turned to her. "With what money?" Lena's voice remained steady. "I will cover it." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "With what money, Lena?" There it was. The real question. Not about art, not about cost. It's about control. After dinner, Daniel sat at the table reviewing the bank app. The notification sound repeated softly. He scrolled. His jaw tightened. He stood abruptly. "Lena!" She walked into the dining room. "Yes?" "There is a transfer here." "Yes." "To where?" She did not hesitate this time. "To my savings." The word hung in the room like something fragile and explosive at the same time. Daniel stared at her. "You do not have separate savings." "I do." "For what reason?" "For security." The word security sounded different in her mouth than it did in his. Daniel's voice lowered. "Are you planning something?" Lena met his eyes. "No." But something in her posture had changed. She was no longer shrinking. She was assessing. Daniel began watching Caleb more closely after that. He would stand in the doorway of his room. Observe. "You are still doing that?" Caleb would nod. Daniel would shake his head. "You need to think about real life." Daniel said those words often. Real life meant stable job, predictable income, respectable image, no deviation. Real life did not include imagination. One afternoon, Daniel found Caleb sketching during what he considered study time. He walked in without knocking. "What subject are you studying?" Caleb swallowed. "I finished my homework." "Then read something useful." "It is useful," Caleb whispered. Daniel stepped forward. "Art does not feed a family." The sentence landed in the room like a verdict. Lena appeared behind him. It was almost instinctual now. She did not announce herself. She just stood there. "He is a child," she said quietly. Daniel did not turn around. "He needs discipline." "He needs encouragement," Lena said quietly. Daniel pivoted slowly. "You think encouragement pays bills?" Lena's face did not move. "It builds people," she continued. Daniel laughed, sharp, dismissive. "You are raising him soft." That was when I saw something flash across Lena's face. Not anger, recognition, because softness had been used against her for decades. And now it was being aimed at her son. The next incident did not feel small. Caleb had submitted a piece to a school showcase. He did not tell Daniel. He told Lena. When the acceptance email arrived, Caleb's hands shook. "They chose it," he said. Lena hugged him once, then twice. "I knew they would," she whispered. Daniel found out accidentally. A letter arrived in the mail. He opened it even though it was not addressed to him. He read it, and something in his face hardened. At dinner that night, he placed the letter on the table. "What is this?" Caleb froze. Lena's fork paused midair. "It is the showcase," Caleb said. Daniel stared at him. "You went behind my back." "I didn't think." "That's the problem." His voice rose slightly. "You don't think." The room tightened. Daniel picked up the letter again. "There's a fee attached." "I can pay it,"
Lena said immediately. With what? With my money. The sentence was quiet, but it cracked something open. Daniel's eyes shifted to her. Your money? Yes. There is no your money. Lena stood. There is now. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Daniel looked at Caleb, then at Lena, then back at Caleb. You will not embarrass this family chasing nonsense. Caleb's lips trembled. And that was the moment. Lena stepped forward. Not dramatically, not screaming. She simply stepped between them. You will not speak to him like that. Daniel stared at her like he had never seen her before. Move, he bellowed. No. One word. Soft. Unshakable. The clock above the hallway ticked loud enough to sound like a warning, and even the refrigerator seemed to fall silent. For years, Daniel's control had been subtle enough to deny. Now it had a visible target, her children. And something inside her, something that had tolerated decades of management, questioning, auditing, silence, refused to tolerate that. I did not know it then, but that was the night the Whitaker marriage crossed a line that could never return from, because Daniel could manage a wife. He could not manage a mother, and Lena had finally decided which one she was going to be. Daniel believed he was shaping discipline. Lena knew he was shrinking possibilities. And once she stepped between him and Caleb, there was no going back. The house did not explode after that night. That would have been easier. Explosions are clean, loud, obvious. What followed was worse. Daniel Whitaker became quieter. And I learned that his quiet was more dangerous than his shouting. It meant he was calculating. Not calmer. Quieter. He did not yell about the showcase again. He did not forbid it directly. He simply began tightening everything else. He reviewed transactions more aggressively. He asked more questions. He lingered in doorways longer. He began commenting on things that had never required commentary before. Why are the lights on in that room? Why is the water bill higher? Why do you need new shoes already? And always, with what money? Lena did not argue. She did not apologize either. That was new. She answered plainly, and then she stopped explaining. It unsettled him more than tears ever had. Caleb attended the showcase. Lena drove him. Daniel did not go. He claimed he was busy. He was not busy. He was watching a game at a restaurant he never invited us to. Caleb's piece hung on a white wall under soft lighting. People stopped. They studied it. They nodded. One woman asked for his name. He whispered, Caleb Whitaker. The way he said it, careful, unsure, made something tighten in my chest. We were all Whitakers. Jonah, Ruth, Caleb, and me. Eli Whitaker. The oldest of the four of us. Lena stood behind him, hands folded. She did not take credit. She did not speak loudly. She simply watched her son exist in a space where he was not being measured. On the drive home, she reached across the console and squeezed his hand. You belong wherever your work is respected, she said. It sounded like a rule she was writing for herself, too. Daniel found out later that someone had offered to feature Caleb's work in a small youth exhibition. There was no prize, no money, just exposure and a modest entry fee. The letter arrived in Daniel's hands again. He did not bring it to dinner this time. He waited. Late that evening, after the house was quiet, he called Lena into the dining room. I was old enough now to recognize when something was about to fracture. I stayed on the stairs, listening. You think this is funny? Daniel's voice was low, controlled. What? Lena replied. This exhibition. He was invited. Daniel held up the letter. This makes our family look unstable. Lena blinked. Unstable? How? You think serious people waste time like this? He is a child. He is a Whitaker.
The name landed like law. Daniel stepped closer. You are filling his head with ideas that will not sustain him. I am filling him with confidence, Lena said. Daniel's jaw flexed. You are undermining me. No, Lena said quietly. I am protecting him. I am protecting my children. The word again, protecting. Daniel's eyes darkened and he said, I am the one who protects this house. From what? Lena asked. There was no sarcasm in her voice, just clarity. Daniel stared at her as if she had insulted him. From foolishness. Lena's voice did not tremble. You confuse control with protection. Silence. Heavy. Irreversible. Daniel moved first. He walked down the hallway toward Caleb's room. Lena followed. So did I. He did not knock. He never knocks. He never respects privacy. He opened the door and walked in. Caleb looked up from his desk. What is happening? He asked. Daniel held up the exhibition letter. This is happening. Caleb swallowed. I did not know it would upset you. It does not upset me. It disappoints me. That word, disappoints. It fell like a stone. I thought you were smarter than this. Caleb's face drained. I am doing well in school. This is distraction. Lena stepped into the doorway. It is development, and children need to be allowed to grow and develop. Daniel turned sharply. You stay out of this. No. The word was steady. Daniel stared at her like he was trying to remember who she used to be. He is my son. And mine too, Lena replied. You are encouraging weakness. Lena stepped fully into the room. And you are attacking his identity. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Identity does not pay bills. Lena's eyes sharpened. And your golf membership pays bills? The air snapped. Daniel's face went still. Do not start. I am not starting, she said. I'm finishing. The room felt too small. Caleb sat frozen, watching the two people who built his world stand on opposite sides of it. You spend thousands every year on clubs and channels and dinners alone, but $80 for your son's growth is reckless? Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. I earned those things. And the rest of us did not? She asked. Silence. The truth had entered the room and refused to leave. And in that moment, I understood what I had been circling for years. This was never really about money or art or discipline. It was about ownership. Daniel did not fear poverty. He feared irrelevance. He feared a house that could function without his permission. He feared children who might grow into people he did not design. For years, he had called it leadership. He had called it protection. He had called it love. But what he loved most was control. And control feels safe until the person you tried to shrink decides to stand. That was the beginning of something Daniel never saw coming. Not rebellion, not chaos. Clarity. Daniel turned back to Caleb, his shoes scraping softly against the floor as he closed the distance between them. You will decline this exhibition. Caleb's hands trembled. I want to go. Daniel stepped closer. You want many things. That does not mean you get them. Lena moved between them, fully this time, not symbolic, physical. You will not shrink him. I won't let you do that to any of our children. Daniel's nostrils flared. He is under my roof. Lena did not step back. And under my protection, she replied. The word again. Daniel's jaw tightened. You think you are protecting them? Yes. From me? Lena held his gaze and said,
Yes. The room stopped breathing. Caleb looked at her like she had done something impossible. Daniel looked at her like she had committed betrayal. "You are destroying this family." "No," Lena replied. "I'm refusing to let you shrink it." Daniel took a step back. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Not rage or dominance. Uncertainty. Because control only works when the other person agrees to it. And Lena had just withdrawn her agreement. There is a moment in every controlled house when the silence changes shape. Not louder, not softer, just different. The person who once asked permission simply stops asking. And the one who built the rules suddenly realizes the rules only worked because someone else kept honoring them. The exhibition fee was paid, from Lena's account. Caleb attended. Daniel did not speak to Lena for 3 days. He did not need to. His silence was punishment, but it didn't land the way it used to. Lena did not chase him. She did not soften her tone. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply continued. Cooking, working, saving, planning. Something had shifted permanently. Lena no longer checked his face before speaking. Caleb no longer hid his sketchbook when he heard Daniel's footsteps. The final break did not happen in Caleb's room. It happened weeks later, at dinner. Daniel began criticizing Ruth's college applications. Too far, too independent, you don't need to move away. Lena set her fork down slowly. They are adults. They are my children. They are not your property, she countered. Daniel stared at her. You have changed. Yes, she said, and she did not apologize for it. That night, Lena came into each of our rooms. She hugged us, once, then twice. But this time, the second hug was different. It wasn't compensating. It was anchoring. She wasn't filling a gap. She was building a foundation. When she hugged Caleb, she whispered, "You will not shrink." When she hugged Ruth, she said, "You will not apologize for wanting more." When she hugged Jonah, her words were, "You will not measure yourself by fear." When she hugged me, she said, "I am not afraid anymore." And that was when I understood. The marriage did not end because of art. It ended because Daniel mistook authority for love, and Lena finally refused to let her children inherit that mistake. My father believed he was losing control. He was. What he did not realize was this. Control had been the only thing holding the marriage together, and once Lena stopped submitting to it, there was nothing left to save. The weeks after the confrontation did not look dramatic. From the outside, the Whittaker home still appeared intact. Dinner was served, bills were paid, laundry was folded, and schedules were maintained. Daniel still left for golf on Saturdays, still watched his premium sports channel, still met colleagues at expensive restaurants where the lighting was low and the plates were artfully arranged. He still wore his watches and introduced Lena in public as my wife. But something invisible had shifted, and Daniel could feel it. He began speaking louder in public again. He repeated his old lines. I protect my family. My house runs because I keep it stable. I sacrifice so my children do not struggle. He said it more often, like he was rehearsing it. Like if he said it enough, it would remain true. At home, Lena changed quietly. She stopped explaining withdrawals. When Daniel asked, "What is this charge?" she answered briefly, "Handled." When he said, "Why did you not consult me?" she replied, "It did not require consultation." She did not challenge him with emotion anymore. She challenged him with composure. And composure unsettled him more than resistance ever did. The savings account grew, not quickly or dramatically, but steadily. Late-night gigs on the laptop continued, except now there was no hiding when I walked in. Lena did not minimize the screen anymore. She let it glow. One night, I sat across from her at the table. "You are building something," I said. She paused. "Yes." "For what?" "For choice." The word choice felt larger than the room. Daniel noticed the shift in our behavior, too. We no longer flinched as quickly. We no longer apologized as automatically. Ruth finalized her college application to a school across the state. Jonah accepted an internship that required commuting without asking Daniel's approval. Caleb continued drawing openly. Daniel commented less, not because he agreed, because he felt the tide turning, and Daniel Whitaker did not know how to exist in a room where he was not central. Years later, I would realize something Daniel never mentioned at retirement dinners. Every opportunity we had been given had quietly been financed by Lena. Every gap, every remaining balance, every final payment. She had made sure none of us entered adulthood carrying debt. "I want you to begin on solid ground," she once told me. At the time, I thought she meant encouragement. I did not realize she had built that ground herself. The financial structure began changing in small, strategic ways. Lena redirected her paycheck. Not all at once, gradually. A portion moved to her independent account, then another. She scheduled meetings during lunch breaks, met with a financial advisor, reviewed pension projections, requested documentation copies. Everything was methodical. Not vengeful, not impulsive, planned. Daniel assumed the distance meant she would eventually soften. He interpreted her calm as temporary rebellion. He believed time would restore order. He did not realize she was constructing an exit, brick by quiet brick, drafting a blueprint he would only see when the door was already built. The children began leaving. The first child to leave the house was me. Not in rebellion, not in anger, just distance. College acceptance letters arrived in thick envelopes that smelled like possibility. Lena hugged me once, then twice. "Build a life that belongs to you," she said. At the time, I thought she was giving advice. Years later, I realized she was giving permission. Next, it was Ruth. Daniel argued against her school choice until the final day. "You do not need to go that far." "I do," she said. He turned to Lena. "You are allowing this." Lena held his gaze. "I am supporting her." Ruth left. Daniel did not hug her goodbye. Lena hugged her once, then twice, and whispered, "Live wide." Jonah left next. Daniel shook his hand formally. No embrace, no "I love you," just "make wise decisions." Lena held Jonah longer. "I am proud of you," she said. Proud, a word Daniel rarely used. Caleb remained the longest. He grew taller, more assured, less apologetic. He won a small scholarship for art. It was not a fortune, but it was validation. Daniel read the acceptance letter in silence. He did not congratulate him. He simply said, "You will regret this path." Caleb replied, "I would regret not trying." Lena watched the exchange quietly, no stepping between them this time, because Caleb no longer needed shielding. He had grown spine where fear used to live. The house grew emptier, quieter. Without the children's presence, Daniel's authority had fewer targets. He and Lena moved around each other like careful strangers. They discussed logistics, utilities, schedules, and extended family obligations. They did not discuss feelings. They had not done that in years. But now even the illusion of partnership was gone. Retirement arrived with ceremony. Daniel hosted a dinner, invited colleagues, spoke about legacy, mentioned sacrifice again. He thanked Lena publicly for standing beside me. The phrase sounded noble. It was incomplete, because she had not stood beside him. She had stood behind him, around him, under him, between him and their children. And now she was standing alone. The day after retirement, Daniel sat at the dining table reviewing the bank app. He frowned. "There is a difference here." Lena did not look up from her tea. "Yes." "Why is the main account lower?" "Because I redirected my income." Daniel blinked. "You what?" "My salary goes to my account now." The room held still. "You cannot do that." "I can." "We agreed." "No," she interrupted calmly. "You decided." Daniel's voice sharpened. "This is my house." Lena looked at him evenly. "No, it is ours." You are trying to embarrass me. I am trying to live without being audited. Daniel stared at her. For the first time, he had no script. He had never imagined Lena without submission. He had never imagined a version of himself without control. And retirement stripped him of the last performance he had. Without his job, without daily authority, without children to direct, all that remained was the marriage, and the marriage no longer functioned on his terms. Days passed. Daniel began asking about money in a different tone, less commanding, more anxious. "What are you planning?" "Stability," Lena replied. "For what?" "For myself." The answer was not loud, but it was final. One afternoon, Lena placed a folder on the table. Daniel glanced at it. "What is that?" "Documentation." "For what?" "For separation." And in that settling, I saw him clearly. This was the moment Daniel had spent decades avoiding. Not conflict, not argument, exposure. He had built a system where love meant obedience, where provision meant power, where protection meant permission. And now the permission was gone. He was not losing a wife, he was losing control, and a man who mistakes control for identity does not know who he is without it. Some people believe power lives in the person who gives the orders, but real power often sits quietly with the person who can walk away from them. When obedience disappears, control has nothing left to stand on. The word did not echo. It settled. Daniel's face changed. "After everything I've done?" Lena did not raise her voice. "You managed us," she said. "You never loved us." Daniel flinched as if struck. "I provided." "I provided," Lena replied. "Just not the way you told people." Silence. Years of silence collapsed into that space. Daniel searched for anger, for dominance, for authority. But he was retired now. The paycheck that once framed his identity had stopped, and Lena no longer required his permission to exist. The divorce was not dramatic. No screaming, no thrown objects, no public scandal. Just signatures, division, and release. Daniel moved into a smaller place. He kept his watches, his golf clubs, and his subscriptions. He kept the version of himself he preferred. When I visited, our conversations stayed polite, surface level. Once he hesitated before leaving and said, "You're doing well." It was the closest thing to affection I had ever heard from him. It sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Lena did not reinvent herself. She did not become louder. She simply became lighter. She traveled occasionally, wore colors she liked, read books without glancing at the clock. And she still hugged us twice. But now, the second hug did not feel like compensation. It felt like celebration. Lena kept her pension, her savings, her independence. She bought herself a dress. Cream-colored, soft, the kind she had once taken off in front of a mirror because Daniel preferred something darker. She wore it without commentary, without permission, without apology. The last time I saw my parents in the same room, Daniel said quietly, "I tried to protect you." Lena looked at him gently. "You tried to control me." He did not argue, because finally there was no one left to perform for. Lena never spoke badly about Daniel, not once, even when we were old enough to see clearly. If we asked, she would only say, "He did what he believed was right." She let us draw our own conclusions. That restraint may have been her greatest strength. After the divorce, something changed in our family dynamic. We called Lena first. We visited more often. We sent her photos. We argued over who would host her for holidays, not out of obligation, out of gratitude. She carried weight we never fully saw, and we loved her for it. I used to think my father was the wall between my mother and the world. When I left that house, I believed distance would help me understand it. It took me another 20 years to see what my mother had really been doing. My father was never the wall. My mother was the foundation, and once she decided to stand without him, the house did not collapse. It finally stopped shaking because foundations do not need permission to stand. For a long time, I thought manhood meant control. I thought authority proved strength. Daniel taught me structure. Lena taught me love. It took losing one version of manhood to understand the other. My father always said he protected my mother. For most of my life, I believed that meant love. I believed love sounded like authority. I believed love looked like management. I believed love required permission. But I was wrong. Protection does not make you smaller. It does not question your groceries. It does not choose your clothes. It does not measure your dreams. My mother protected us in ways that never made noise. She worked when no one was watching. She saved when no one noticed. She hugged us twice, once for herself and once to replace what we were missing. She stood between us and the version of love that demanded silence in exchange for stability. And when my father retired, when the paycheck stopped and the performance ended, the truth stood alone in the room. He had managed a family. She had built one. The day she chose herself, nothing dramatic happened. The walls didn't fall. The world didn't end. It simply became quiet. And in that quiet, I finally understood something that took me 30 years to learn. Control can look like devotion, but real love does not need to be audited. If you've ever lived in a house where love felt like permission, leave a comment and tell me what that taught you. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Some stories are loud, and some stories are quiet, the kind that sit with you long after the screen goes dark. If you're not ready to leave just yet, there's another story waiting for you on the screen. Because sometimes the truth we avoid in one family shows up again in another.